Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay I'd like to talk about how do we outlaw, if we want to outlaw free speech, or we want to outlaw communism, how do we go about it? What do we do? Do we do it on the sly, quietly in background, just quietly taking people out back and shooting them? How do we stop free speech? Do we have a covert government department that gets under the sheets, between the sheets with the big tech giants and conspires to shut people down? Or how do we go? What if we want to get outlaw communism or something? Look, these are big questions. In my view, at least, if there's a decision to be made like that, and the government wants to do it, then they can take it to the people. And I don't mean some indirect bullshit lines in an election time. They have to go to a referendum to the people, and we want to shut down all free speech, and we want to make sure that people who we don't like aren't allowed to have any say in anything in any way at any time on any subject. That's what we want. And we want to be able to put them in prison, maybe even kill them if they don't do as they're told. Now, it would be hard in a referendum to get up with that sort of thing. The people most likely don't go, oh, no, sorry, buddy. But in 1950s Australia, small country at the time, still a small country, but in 1950s Australia, with a population, I think, of something like 7 million, the government of the day, which was a centre-right government, decided that they wanted to outlaw communism and the Communist Party. And communism couldn't exist politically in any way. But instead of just going on and doing it, they did what any democratic government should do. They said, okay, we want to outlaw communism, and we're going to have a referendum, and the fucking people can decide, which is how it should be. This is a momentous decision, not because you agree or don't agree with communism. That's by the by, and it's do you agree that people who have those views should have a right to speak and put their views forward, and you have an option of listening or not listening, or agreeing with them or not agreeing. And you as a citizen have that right. Now, anyone who wants to shut down any group anywhere for any reason is, in my view, advocating against democracy and against the rights of the citizen. It doesn't matter what the argument is, or the point of view is, or the political party is. Once you say, well, you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to talk, then I believe the civis is devalued as a result of it. So the government of the time, this is 1950s. Now, but keep in mind, let's just have a look at the 1950s. The 1950s and early 1960s and so on. This was the Cold War. This was when people were wringing their hands and chewing their fingernails, and were very concerned about the possibility of nuclear war. In 1949, the Russians, the Soviet Union, exploded their first atomic bomb, and until then, the Americans had a monopoly on it. On atomic bombs, and the Russians had one. It wasn't that long afterwards that the communist Chinese had one, and it was all opened up. So the idea of there was the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, Vietnam War coming later, and what was known as the Malaysian insurgency, where the communists tried to take over Malaysia. There was communist insurgency in Indonesia, and so there was a lot of disquiet around, and there was a communist party in Australia. You couldn't say they were doing well, but they were there and they had funding. The Soviets were supporting them and assisting them, which was a genuine cause for concern. but that's in the Soviet constitution to support communist activities around the world. So they were only sticking true to their constitution there, although the spies and so on that was a bit over the top. But anyway, there was a lot of concerns, and then those days, just to sort of put them in some perspective, whenever there was a new government in Australia or a new prime minister, or for that matter, a new president in the United States, the Australian prime minister was on a plane quicker than you could say jump, and was flying over to the United States to get the president, to ask the president to sign the agreement that America would come to Australia's aid in the event of being invaded by China or whoever. And this was, Australia was in no position to defend itself with a population of 7 million. So without a powerful friend like the United States, Australia was quite isolated. And when the prime minister would come back from America, come back from seeing the president, it would be a national address, or all the television stations would stop, and the prime minister, and I have been to see the American president, and he has signed this agreement, and all this sort of stuff. And it was to assure the public. So anyway, the government decided that we're going to shut down communism in Australia. No Communist Party. And if you engage in communist activities, you're going to be in deep shit. But they did the right thing. They can have that view as a political party or a government if you want. And okay, they were quite clear about it. This is what we want to do. And there wasn't anything, in my view at least, there wasn't anything hidden or underhanded about it. We want to get rid of the communists. We want to shut down the party, and anyone that talks or speaks communism will be in breach of the law. And will have their ass dragged into court and all that sort of stuff. Now, there were, I guess, two parts to this. Firstly is the decision to outlaw the Communist Party and communism was a decision for the people, for the citizens. The citizens had to agree that was what they wanted, and that was the right decision. That was the first one. The second thing was that people who were, assuming you passed, which you didn't, but if people were allegedly guilty or arrested for communist activities or practicing communism, that they were fully entitled to full due process of law in a court of law with a jury. Now, those were the two really important takeaways here. Critically important, those two things. Now, so the referendum was held. Now, there was, as you could imagine, there was some, a lot of hysteria on both sides, and each side was accusing the other of being evil and bad and this and that. The point. I mean, some of the people arguing for even from the left of politics were arguing that don't do this, don't outlaw the Communist Party, because once you outlaw these guys because you don't like what they say, what comes next? Who else are you going to outlaw? What other people? It's going to lead to the possibility of arbitrary arrest, arbitrary detention, and all sorts of other things you really don't want, not in a functioning democracy and in a functioning civis. So what the people arguing against, and had I been old enough, well, I wasn't alive then, but had I been old enough at the time, I would have argued in favour of keeping the Communist Party. Not because I support the Communist Party or what they do or what they stand for, and nor would I support the terrible things they would do to us if they got in charge, if they were in control. Make no mistake, they would shut us down. No doubt about that. But the material point here is that it's still the people's decision as to whether or not these guys get outlawed, the communists in this case. And I would have argued against it. I would argue that they must be allowed to stay. And if their arguments and their policies and so on are good enough, then the people can vote for them. And if they're not good enough, then they won't get votes, won't get voted in. So, and a reasonably prosperous country like Australia, then everybody had work if they wanted it. Then the traction communists could get was pretty minimal, outside of the ideological fanatics in things like trade unions some of the teachers' unions, that sort of thing. They really weren't getting much traction. So anyway, the big day comes. The referendum's held. It lost. The government that was trying to outlaw and communism, the Communist Party lost. I'm glad they did. Not by a whole lot, by the way. I mean, you'd even go as far to say it was perhaps a somewhat close-run thing, but it didn't get up, and the Communist Party was allowed to continue, as indeed was the communist activists and so on. Now, they never got anywhere, and they were never elected into any government. They've pretty much become the Green Party these days in a lot of ways, but they've never done did any good at the ballot box, and the people never really warmed to them. And there was genuine fear about communism at the time. The Soviets and Soviet activity in Eastern Europe, and 1956 in Hungary, and later on in Czechoslovakia, and so on, and even after that in Poland. So that was important that it didn't get up, but even if it had got up, although I did doubt this a little bit, the idea was, or the view was, that anyone that accused should still be entitled to full due process of law. And these two things together, if the government wants to make do something like this, they must have a referendum. And the second is the protected due process of law. So and habeas corpus, you can't be arbitrarily arrested and detained indefinitely. These are critical things that we've lost today. Look at the mass immigration into the West. No, there was no referendum on that. There was no vote. It's just being rammed through by the governments that are all globalist controlled. That know that if they took it to the people, they would lose, and so no, we're not going to let the people vote. We don't want the people thinking this is a democracy and they're citizens within the democracy. We don't want that. So the big decisions today are not being put to a referendum, and that, I think, is a great tragedy and is an indication of the decline of democracy and the decline of the civic participation that's such a vital underwriting influence and power within a democracy. But also we're losing whatever's left of it, due process of law. Most of the law practice now is ideological. Activists are masquerading as judges, activists masquerading as prosecutors and attorneys general and so on. And something that would be unthinkable years ago is now normal practice. Hey, that guy's my political opponent. I don't fucking like him, so I'm just going to arrest him on whatever I can dream up, and I'll keep him in prison for as long as the fuck I want to, and then I'm going to put him in front of an activist judge and throw him in prison. This sort of stuff. Where there's collusion and conspiracy to actively go after innocent people and then imprison them. This is an outrage. This is terrible. And look at the toll it's taking on our democracy, to the point where no one's going to believe in it anymore. And no one's going to believe in the nation, the democracy, the society we have, its history, which is what the globalists want, of course. But at least in the 1950s, as much as these people hated communists, were scared of them, were frightened of them, had discovered secret agents running around stirring up trouble, and much as they wanted, they still went to the people for a decision. They still relied on the people. It's your country, it's your nation, it's your government, we serve you, we are public servants. It's your decision whether or not the communists are outlawed, and that critical decision to go to the people for their decision on the matter is something that should be in all big issues today as much as it was then. And because governments, I know, penetrated and influenced and infiltrated by the globalists, I know, but because governments don't do that now, then we're all poorer because of it, and the decline of the Western civis is gathering apace because of that failure to recognise the importance of the people's decision. You've been Tacitus today, your pushback channel. Thank you for listening.